just in case, I'm also gonna save this to an audio file, which I just started now. So, and again, so Blonde deals with childhood trauma, childhood physical, psychological, sexual abuse. There is drug abuse. There's different forms of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and possibly a suicide at the ending. So, fair warning, this stuff is going to be discussed throughout. So. And again, this is based on the 2001 TV movie Blonde, based on the book. Take some liberties. And I know a little bit more about the Netflix movie. I haven't seen the Netflix movie, but I've extensively researched it and stuff, just because it was, just the hot ticket for a long time. Received very negative reviews, to the point where there's almost a conspiracy around it, but I'll get into that. And as of making this video, I still have not completed the movie, but I basically know how it's going to end. I'm pretty close to being done with it. And the reason why I'm talking about it is I have not seen a movie that's been like as captivating as Blonde has been for me in a very long time. So, to start from the beginning, and again, Blonde is a fictionalized telling of the story of Norma Jean and the mythology, legacy, and depiction of Marilyn Monroe. And I just want to put out there in advance, a lot of people have accused this, the book and both movies, of hating Marilyn Monroe, wanting to spite her, and being misogynistic. And I just want to say I can't speak to the book, because again, I have not read the book. But from what I've seen of the Netflix movie, and definitely from what I've seen of the 2001 TV movie, I can say it's definitely not written from the point of view of someone who hates Marilyn Monroe or Norma Jean. And it's definitely not misogynistic. I made the comparison. I said, this movie is misogynistic and anti Norma Jean / Marilyn Monroe, in the sense that Schindler's List is anti-Semitic. Yes, you see some pretty terrible stuff happening to Marilyn Monroe. You see a lot of the grim and gritty, the ugly side of things, but it never portrays her like she is a bad person or that she deserves any of the abuse that she is receiving. So the movie starts with, it starts in medias res, kind of. We see Marilyn Monroe as an adult lying on the beach, seemingly asleep. And then it goes back to her childhood, and we see her with her mother, and the mother is very clearly troubled. She has a very particular manner of speaking, and it's just her raising a little girl in the 20s. The movie doesn't give you the dates, and it's like, if you're not a Marilyn Monroe historian, which I am not, it gets a little confusing. But, so, we see Norma Jean as a child, and uh, the mother works in Hollywood. She works for a film studio. You're not exactly sure what she does, or even if she actually is what she says. Um, but she's always telling her daughter about her father. We never see the father. We see some photographs of a man who might be her father, but maybe not. But according to the mother, the father is a prominent figure in Hollywood. What does he do? I don't know, and she never really clarifies. She just says he is a powerful man in Hollywood. And so the movie jumps around a little bit, but we see Norma Jean in this very clearly dysfunctional two-person household, which eventually a third person is introduced, and I believe it's the mom's possibly boyfriend, possibly assistant, possibly not exactly sure. And when he's introduced, because he just kind of shows up and he's teaching young Norma Jean how to play the piano. And I was under the impression that the movie had jumped ahead a couple of years, because we see him shortly after an instance where Marilyn Monroe's mother abused her. She has her take like extremely hot baths. She does things of that nature. And so, and I was under the impression, she was with foster family, and we see the guy is, helping her play the piano, and he's kind of goofing around. He's also drinking a very large glass of whiskey, which is kind of like, okay, it kind of sets the tone for what kind of movie this is going to be. And then, well, it starts off with just innocent goofing around, and then it gets a little more suggestive, to the point where once he hears the mother's voice, he moves away and says, "We have to stop." And and that's some of the most disturbing stuff in the movie to me personally, because we are witnessing child abuse, and it is of a sexual nature. And just through dialogue that young Norma Jean just gives, you can tell that what we're seeing is not the worst of it, but worst off, she does not understand that this is not normal behavior on his part. And then eventually the mother locks herself and Norma Jean in the bedroom, because she is essentially faced with the fact that this make-believe man, who we don't know who he is, we're just told this is Norma Jean's father, and again, never see him. But the mother is kind of hit with the reality that he's not there, he has not sent for them, and she has locked herself and her daughter in her bedroom, and they have been there for 2 days. And then the mother, possibly on purpose, possibly by accident, sets the apartment on fire. And they are rescued, but the mother is put in a mental institution. And Norma Jean is brought to an orphanage because this man, whether it's the mom's boyfriend, handler, whatever, says, I cannot be a parent to you. And so when she's in the orphanage, she's always talking about her mother, she's talking about this father, and the stories she tells about the father, they kind of change over time, and it's like, we don't know if it's a lie that she is intentionally fabricating, or if it's just like this is what these fragmented memories mixed with trauma if this is what she believes. It's like, is she lying? I don't know. Does she believe this? I don't know. But she's constantly believing there is someone out there who cares, and that is the image of her father. And we're also introduced to just kind of what type of movie this is. Most of the characters are either pure evil, just all around nasty, or, you know, in some way just flawed and destructive. All the girls in the orphanage are very cruel. They tell her, your mother and father, they're dead, just like the rest of us. We also see how Norma Jean was not able to be adopted because the mother would not sign. She would not sign over custody, even though she was in a mental institution. And the head of the orphanage is a very religious woman, and she's not by any means cruel. She's actually one of the only good characters in the movie. And the characterizations overall, they're pretty one-dimensional. And every man in the movie is pretty much pure evil or just very hard to sympathize with. But it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like it's telling you all men are evil. It's just every man that she has encountered has had an agenda. And we see Norma Jean in a foster family where the foster father is clearly leering at her, and she's 16 at the time, and the foster mother, who does seem to really care for her, she is, she's catching on, and obviously it's nothing that Norma Jean has done. It is just the idea that, it's like, oh, my husband has eyes for this girl, and it's like, well, I don't want to kick her out, but this can't go on like this. And then we see Norma Jean is trying to pursue acting. She's trying out for the school play. Doesn't go well. She confides in a teacher who I thought was going to be a good guy, but then I noticed he's sitting a little too close to her. And then we see him driving her home, which is a huge no. And then he goes to kiss her, and it's like, okay, he's a creep. And then we see, well, she just has a boyfriend who's never named. But with both of them, she says, you can kiss me, but only if your mouth is closed. And so it's like, and so from right there, we can kind of see the movie is not saying Marilyn Monroe is a slut, she's a harlot. No, it's very much, she is a woman who is looking for just someone who will look out for her. And when you're raised in an environment where it's like, love comes at a price, whether that price is, occasionally being told you're nothing, or being beaten, or having people make inappropriate advances on you. That is very much the world and the reality that she lives in, very tragically. And so the foster mother, who really, should have been the one person who's looking out for her, just decides, if I can get her to get married, she'll be out of the house, she'll be safe. And she says it's not her fault, and it's probably not the husband's fault. I mean, it is entirely the husband's fault that he's a creep. But she says, for a woman to survive, sometimes you have to betray your own. And so she's basically saying the choice is me or Norma Jean, and I choose me. And so she finds this strapping young man named Bucky, and he a little bit almost kind of looks like the Winter Soldier, so that was just playing in my head. And he's going to enlist in the army, and seems like just a really nice guy. You know, he's kind to his mother. He's a gentleman, and but it is made very clear. It's like, Norma Jean, this is Bucky. Bucky, this is Norma Jean. You two are gonna get married. Okay, bye. And then we see them at their, I think it's their wedding. I thought it was like a going away party, but no, it's their wedding. And we can just kind of see he's a nice guy, but he's very pushy, and he's definitely the one in charge of this relationship. We see there's a lot of the we never see her in a healthy relationship. It's always one of us is in charge, and that's the guy, and then there's you. And when we see her eventually get involved with more limelight, it's just a matter of like she bumps into this person who knows this person, and eventually she starts posing for pinup pictures, which you can tell she does not want to do. And we just see over time like how her husband, he sees her as more like a trophy, and is like something he can brag about to the other guys who, I guess when he enlists, they're all with him. It's very weird, and it doesn't explain a lot of it. But the one thing that we do see is the whole time she was married to him, she wants to have a child, and we see her caring for another woman's child, which she does while her husband is at work. I don't know exactly what he's doing. He just seems to be at this recruitment place with all these guys, and he's presumably just there. And then we see her bring the baby back to its mother, who looks like she's in a coma, like she's sitting on a stoop and just like, and but you know, Norma Jean is passing off as like, oh, this is my daughter, and my husband's overseas in New Guinea. So we see right off the bat she wants a child. You know, she wants to not be alone, and the whole time she was growing up, in one way or another, she was always alone. Everyone who was supposed to care about her either left, was never in the picture to begin with, or loved her conditionally, if at all. And another thing that the books and the movies were criticized for is, apparently it was a known thing that Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean, could not conceive children. They think she may have had some kind of, I don't know if it was like a deficiency or if there was like, but for whatever reason, she could not get pregnant. She could not have children. And in this movie, well, in all the movies, we see her get, at least one abortion. I believe there's 2. Again, I have not finished this movie. I know in the Netflix one, there is 2 abortions and 1 miscarriage. And for a lot of people, that was kind of the straw that broke their back. It's like, as Marilyn Monroe never had an abortion, and what I immediately thought of is, no, Norma Jean did not have an abortion, but Judy Garland had an abortion. It was basically forced on her. It was just apparently a thing that was done, and that's what really made me realize this movie, yes, it's about a fictional Norma Jean / Marilyn Monroe, but it's not just talking about her and her life and her struggles. It is talking about Hollywood and its treatment of women, and especially young women. This version of Marilyn Monroe embodies basically everything that Hollywood preys on. Youthful, innocent, kind of naive, easily led astray, we see her go from a very hopeful young woman to just this increasingly broken, distant, uh, more of a living icon than a human being, who is treated more like a symbol than a person. And we see her, you see that marriage, her first marriage fall apart. Then eventually, well, we see her working as a model for this just sleazy, nihilistic creep who is trying to, and this was one of the scenes that it's unintentionally humorous because, well, and she says very earnestly, "You're not going to turn me into a joke, are you?" And he just replies with, and also subtlety does not exist here. He says, "You are a joke. The female body is a joke," and she goes like, "Ah." And he takes her picture, and it was like, well, that's not funny. And then he says, the whole reason we do this is to drive people to have sex, and 99% of the human population doesn't deserve to live. And to that she goes, ah, and he takes her picture again. And it's like, well, what he's saying is not funny, and it's very clear that he's not joking. And so, yeah, we just see, and it progressively gets worse and worse to the point where she's in these movies that are kind of raunchy for their time. By today's standards, they'd be pretty tame. But we find out, there was a degree of like, it was like, sweetie, if you want to get this role, you're going to have to earn it, if you know what I mean. And just, and every executive is just kind of a scumbag who they're after one thing. And again, it's very cliche, but from what I understand, the man who they're referring to, who I don't know much about him, so I'm just not gonna name names, but he was a person with a very sordid reputation who, it was apparently kind of a public secret. It was like, oh yeah, it's Tuesday, so he's got some young woman over at his house, and maybe she's going to be a star, maybe not. And it's very disturbing. And the fact that that was such a prominent thing in that day and age, I mean, it still is today, but it's way more brushed under the rug. But the one thing that Blonde the book and Blonde the movies really put out there is, look at how these people suffered. Look at how these women suffered. And again, women were not the only ones who were taken advantage of. They're still not. But it was something that happened very prominently to women in Hollywood. There's countless just horror stories. I always gravitate towards the Judy Garland story. And I think that a lot of people took issue with the fact that we see a large amount of abuse being suffered by Marilyn Monroe / Norma Jean, and it is not something that she rises above. And the reason it's in there is to say, how do you rise above this? This is wrong. And it captures that feeling of hopelessness, feeling of entropy, and she can't escape it, and we as the audience cannot escape it. But the movie does not portray it as she is like pure, like this doe-eyed girl. A lot of the time she does not help herself, whether because she doesn't know to help herself or she doesn't know how to help herself. And again, she is never portrayed like a bad person. She is not a harlot. The movie does not hate her. It is very much, she is forced into this very particular role, and she is acting out of how she thinks things should be. Like, she really thinks this is what I need to go through to be loved. This is what I need to go through to be a wife. And that is, just increasingly degrading herself, enduring all these different forms of abuse. And another thing is, we see glimpses of. My underwear's sticking out, I'm sorry. We see glimpses of kind of who Norma Jean was in the real world, in our world, so to speak. Because Norma Jean was an intelligent, thoughtful young woman. Marilyn Monroe was a mask that she wore. It was a persona. And that was, the ditzy, kind of bottle blonde type. This movie, there's less of a distinction between Norma Jean and Marilyn Monroe. And again, it's not done in a way that's degrading, and it's not telling you Norma Jean / Marilyn Monroe was a bimbo. No, it's very much, she is a lifelong victim. Which, that has some very negative connotations, but it's basically a person whose entire mindset has been warped by the trauma that she has been made to endure for her whole life. And it's very tragic in that respect. And to see it all play out, it's very upsetting. And I really feel I need to make this statement. Blonde is absolutely not anti-Marilyn Monroe, in the sense that it's not anti-Norma Jean. It is saying what Marilyn Monroe is, that public image, it's saying that's not a good thing. It's saying these false faces that we wear, that objectify us, that's bad. It is not empowering. And it's like, you have the fame, you have the fortune, all that stuff, but it's like, but look at how it came to be, look at everything that has been taken from you. It's pro actress and anti Hollywood, in the respect that a movie like Saving Private Ryan is pro-soldier, anti-war. We feel for Norma Jean. She is the only sympathetic character in the film. We feel for her, and we see the tragedy of Marilyn Monroe, the tragedy of her becoming Marilyn Monroe. And in a way, it feels like kind of how Batman and the Punisher are portrayed in media, where we all know who Frank Castle or Bruce Wayne, who they're gonna turn out to be. But when we see them go from being Bruce Wayne and Frank Castle to being these broken icons, and that's what Marilyn Monroe is an icon, there is that element of great tragedy. Like, it's like when you see Batman don the cowl, and when we see Marilyn Monroe with the bleach blonde hair, the response is like, no. It's like, no, not you. But that's the way that it has to be. That's the way the story is told. And yeah, and some people said, well, even if the person who wrote the book or made the movies doesn't hate Norma Jean, it's still in bad taste. And that is something I can understand. I don't agree, but I can kind of understand. But what I would want you to consider is the way it is using Marilyn Monroe and Charlie Chaplin Jr. and Joe DiMaggio and John F. Kennedy, who has yet to appear in the 2001 movie. I don't know if he does or not. And most of the people are not mentioned by name in the 2001 movie. It is not professing to be biographical. It never puts across the facade that this is real. This is a fictionalized version of the life and struggles of Norma Jean / Marilyn Monroe. It's a fictional version of Norma Jean. It's a fictional version of Charlie Chaplin Jr. It's a fictional version of John F. Kennedy. What I would compare it to is essentially the Disneyfication of Aladdin, Pocahontas, ones like that, where it's taking these real life events, these real life people, and using them to tell this story, which I think is a story that needs to be told. And you can argue the validity of vilifying real people, and and if you have the right information, I mean, it's all a matter of perspective. But to me, the movie is not telling you John F. Kennedy was a bad man. It's not telling you Charlie Chaplin Jr. was a bad man. It's telling you the people who are in these positions, who make these choices, which they may or may not have made outside of this movie. It's saying this is wrong. It's essentially, it's turning them into Shakespearean characters and telling the story of a tragedy. Like, it never says, we know that John F. Kennedy had Marilyn Monroe killed, because we don't know that, and no one is professing to know that. It's just saying, in this world, in this story, someone in power abused that power, and they hurt someone. And it's not, just because the movie tells you it's John F. Kennedy doesn't mean it's John F. Kennedy. He is every person in power who has used their power to hurt someone else and protect themselves. Same with Edward G. Robinson Jr., Charlie Chaplin Jr., Joe DiMaggio. And Joe DiMaggio is portrayed surprisingly sympathetically in this movie. I mean, he's only in a couple of scenes, but we see he really repents, because the only act of abuse we ever see is that he smacks Marilyn Monroe, which, I mean, it's awful, and it's very upsetting to see that, but it's done in a way where it's just like he lost his temper once. That doesn't make it okay, but it was like, it also doesn't deal with the fact that he was an alcoholic. Like, he did not just like, today's the day, it was very much, he lost himself in the booze. And in this movie, it's just kind of like he's had a bad day, to put it lightly. And it's like he slipped up this one time. But it makes a point to say that after Marilyn Monroe died, he had flowers put on her grave, was like twice a week for 20 years. And it turns out in real life, after he got off the booze, he kind of came back and told her, I'm sorry, I can't undo the damage that I've done to you. I can't fix the scars and the trauma that you live with, but I really am sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but just know that it was wrong. And she actually did forgive him, and they became just friends. Obviously the romance was dead, if it ever existed in the first place, but the two of them had a friendship, and we kind of see like this little bit of a redemption story for Joe DiMaggio in the movie. But at one point, he's just out of her life, and we really kind of see things start to spiral out of control, just with everything, and there's so much just manipulation, and yeah, and so I guess that's just my point in just kind of making this whole video. And again, the Netflix movie, it's very explicit, like it has an NC-17 rating, And it's not a lot of the controversy about the Netflix movie was the fact that we see a graphic rape scene in it. And it's like, I do not condone pornography in any form. And I think this, from what I've heard, this movie kind of crosses that line. But I can also acknowledge that it's not done to glorify the act. It is done to show you, to essentially make you experience the same pain and trauma that Marilyn Monroe, or at least this fictional version of Marilyn Monroe, experienced. And to leave you with the impression of oh my gosh, that's horrible. I don't want to be the kind of person who does this. And again, you can do that without, being pornographic. This movie did not do that. It does become pornographic. But there is a purpose behind it. And so I don't believe that Joyce Carol something or other, or whoever made the 2001 movie, or Andrew Dominic, who made the Netflix movie. No, I do not believe that they hate Marilyn Monroe. I do not believe that this book or these movies were made with malicious intent. I do think that Andrew Dominic has a very shameless fetish for Marilyn Monroe, and that's why there are so many scenes that are just devoted to her just walking around naked and things like that. But the message is consistent, and the message is trauma distorts it distorts your sense of reality. It leads you down a destructive path. And even if Marilyn Monroe did not endure any of what the fictionalized version of her did, we still walk away with the message of this is how people should not be, and this is the damage that can be done to anyone if other people abuse their affections or choose to abuse them in any way. So overall, Blonde, the 2001 TV movie, it suffers from, and I assume that a lot of this stems from the book, but a lot of the characters are very superficial. There is no subtlety. It gets a little bit gratuitous with some of its dialogue, but it is all done with a purpose. It is all done as a sort of cautionary tale, and also exposing this very real and ugly side to fame, celebrity, Hollywood, all those things. Far from a perfect movie, far from a perfect story, but captivating. It has something to say, and it does not shy away from saying it. And maybe that's too much for some people, but coming from me, who the only thing I have in common with Norma Jean, Marilyn Monroe, is that I'm an entertainer of sorts, who in one way or another has created a public image that differs from who I actually am. But from my perspective, this is what the movie is doing. This is the purpose for his existence, and I think that validates what it does, what it says, and how it says it. And again, I do not speak for the book. I do not speak for the Netflix movie. This is my impression of the 2001 made-for-TV movie. So if anyone has seen any of the movies or read the book, or, if you have anything to add or critique or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. But yeah, this was just I just kind of had to get this out in the open while it's still hot on my mind. And my gosh, it is spellbinding. It's like Elfin Lied in that I just can't put it out of my head, and I just can't stop watching. Even though the flaws are glaring, it's just like, you got me. I'm hooked. And so, yeah, and my takeaway from all of this, be good to each other. If you have the power to hurt someone, don't. If you have the power to help someone, do it. And know that just because you portray cruelty, it does not mean that you are the source of it. It does not mean that you are cruel. And I think we need more stories like Blonde. And just, but you can be hopeful. You can have a hopeful movie. Blonde is not hopeful, but it is real in the respect that these things do happen. And again, do not take it as fact, because it is not fact. It is based on a plethora of different things. So yeah, thanks for everybody who tuned in, everybody who's going to watch this in some way. Just thanks for your time. And again, feel free to comment below. Let me know. Alright guys, be safe out there, and Merry Christmas.